As we continue our series regarding the law of God, in particular how it should be seen by the Christian, we are going to begin today by considering the first commandment as it is found in the Reformed Church. However, with a bit of a review, in considering the prologue, as we remember, this is where God says, "I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage." We considered that he begins that with, "I am the Lord your God." So first of all, this is a personal relationship. He is our God and we are his people. Now, I think it's imperative, as it is the prologue before all of the Decalogue, all of the 10 commandments, it would be prudent for us to take the prologue and attach it prior to every single individual commandment. So with each preceding commandment after, you shall have no other gods before me, and then it goes into, you shall have no idols, we should preface that with, again, I am the Lord your God who has ultimately delivered you. The law is meant to point us to the lawgiver. Okay, so firstly, we want to remember that this is a personal relationship. It begins with what God does for us. And then it is in that light we begin to seek what we ought to do for him and unto him. Okay? Now, I also think it's imperative before we begin to consider the 10 Commandments, or the first one anyway, in particular today, that this is a historical event. This is something that separates Judaism and even Christianity to other religions. This happened in time and space. Firstly, he definitely delivered these people out of Egypt, the Israelites, out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, which he was not obligated to do outside of the fact that he promised he would do so. That is his only obligation. However, since he is our great liberator, this not only obligates us to obey his commandments and so on, but we are free to obey his commandments. Again, he is the great lawgiver. And now we seek to obey our master. He has liberated us. We were slaves in sin. Sin was our master. Now, the great God, the great good God, is our holy master. And we seek to obey him out of love and adoration, not out of fear of punishment. However, this is a historical narrative. This happened in time and space, as well as did the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Before we even can get to the Bible, we need to know if Jesus Christ truly is risen. Is he risen indeed? That, again, I believe the first and most important question in all the world, as Christ asked, "Who do men say that I am?" And it was the blessed apostle Peter who said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus said, "Blessed art thou, Peter, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." Peter, you didn't figure this out yourself. You didn't meditate on your own with all the philosophical, knowledge that you have. He was a fisherman. You didn't come to this by your own intellect or even by your own emotions. My Father has revealed this to you. This is the only way we truly know who the Son of Man, who this Christ, this Son of God, this Son of Man is. Okay, so let us remember, this is a historical narrative. God acts in time and space. He has created all things according to his goodness. Remember, he saw everything and saw that it was good. Except for that man should be alone. That was his first malediction, and he attended to that quite quickly and quite wonderfully. However, again, this is a historical thing. Okay, we're not believing in some esoteric knowledge that might be or might not be. This happened. Okay. Now, before we consider the first commandment, I do want to discuss 4 elements given by John Calvin, which ought to be seen through the law in rendering to God. In particular, this first commandment, "Thou shalt have no other gods before me." Okay? So the first So the four elements, let me just list them off and then we'll go one by one very briefly. The first is adoration, okay? The second is trust. The third is invocation. The fourth is thanksgiving. Now, we can see in this, look, I have to say, the one thing, it's really a person I have to beware of idolizing too much is my wife, Sarah. I adore her. I trust her. I do bring invocations toward her. This is a calling upon. And I do thank God for her. And I thank her for what she brings to our marriage and to our family and so on. However, the adoration should be obvious enough. This is where we give all of our affections over to God. This truly is, we worship with the mind. Remember, this is what Christ says. We worship with the mind, the heart, and the soul. Okay, so all of our being is to be given over to God and God alone. So insofar as I can adore my wife, truly, and this would please God, there is only one I can adore before I can actually adequately adore her. I can adore her in his light. If I begin to adore her without even considering him, then I don't adore her rightly. And I obviously do not please God, and that's where she becomes something of a God to me. Okay? Now, second is trust. Simply put, God alone is trustworthy. Now, again, I absolutely trust my wife. She's given me no reason not to trust my wife. But even insofar as she might give me decent advice and so on, she's not omniscient. She is not omnipotent. There's only so far that advice might be true or not. God is omniscient. He is all-knowing, and he knows me perfectly. So he knows everything I need, so I can trust him. I can trust him to go to him with everything about myself, whether it's pain, whether it's suffering, whether it's this great reward that I've received, whether it's my wife, whether it's some sort of struggle, whatever it is, God alone is trustworthy. Invocation. This is calling upon God. Now, we're probably this particular one, this consideration of the first commandment is going to spill over into next week. Okay, there's no way, since y'all confine me into half an hour with these, there's no way we're going to get through this merely today. However, I do want to introduce this a bit. Firstly, and we will get into this here in a minute, but when God says, "You shall have no other gods before me," I see in that a distinction anyway, and this is why the Reformed Church actually does separate the first and the second commandment as we do. The gods that in which he speaks of in the first commandment isn't fashioned. In other words, it's not made by hands. People worship stars. People worship trees. People worship all sorts of God's creation, and worshiping God's creation rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. So, however, in some other faith traditions, they call upon the saints. They call upon the saints. And look, there are all sorts of distinctions that are taught in these doctrines. But again, it's a distinction without a difference, simply put. However, God alone is worthy of such invocation. And again, God alone is able to hear all the cries, all the prayers of the saints. The saints that are past are not omniscient. They are not omnipresent. They can't hear the prayers of a saint in London, and a saint in Paris, and a saint in San Antonio, and a saint in New York, and a saint in Botswana at the same time. They cannot. Only God is absolutely holy. He is absolutely all-knowing. And so we bring our invocations to him. We call upon him because he alone is worthy. He alone is able. Thanksgiving is obvious enough as well. In all things, all good and perfect gifts come from above, from the Father of lights, in whom there is no variation or shadow of turning. He is the great Father. Even sufferings. Remember, this is why James says, "Rejoice, my brethren, when you fall into various trials, knowing that the testing of your faith produces more of a complete faith." the perfect faith, right? And so even our trials and so on, we are to also give thanks to God. Every good and perfect gift in all of your lives, God has ordained all to come to pass, period, but specifically in love and affection and discipline as a father for all of his sons and daughters. So we ought to give him the absolute thanks. Again, I can thank my wife for how much she contributes into our marriage and how much she contributes into our family and so forth. She contributes quite a bit, but I thank God for that more so, because he has made her this way anyway. I mean, she's always been a great wife and a great mother, but he has truly grown her into the woman she is. And so we give him all of our thanks. So we give him all of our adoration, all of our love and affection. We give him all of our trust. We call upon him, and we give him all the thanks we can think to render to him, and we can give to him. Okay, so before we consider the first of these commandments, they're in different faiths or different denominations. There are just differences as to how the order goes, the number goes in these commandments. Many assign the first, and as we see it, the second commandment is one. And that's why partly we are going to bring some of this into the next session, the first commandment and the second commandment. There is something of a link, but again, there is a clear distinction between you shall have no other gods before me, period, and you shall not fashion any gods as well. So there is a link, but there is also a clear distinction. So it's just important to recognize that in other traditions, the order is a bit different. Now, when he says, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage, you shall have no other gods before me. Now, the before, what does before mean? Many people assume this means that God has to take preeminence. He's like the first place God. We can have other gods, but he must be our greatest God. The Hebrew is al. Okay, I'm not good in speaking Hebrew, but it's one syllable and it shouldn't be difficult. But again, I speak Texan, so it's al. Okay, now when used as a preposition, it means upon, on the ground of, according to, on account of, on behalf of, concerning, beside, in addition to, together with, beyond, above, over, by, onto, towards, to, against. In other words, you shall have no other gods. No other gods. No one and nothing should have any such love, any such trust, any such invocation, any such thanksgiving. Nothing. Nothing. Now, this is harder than you actually might think in our walk as Christians. You know, we get shiny objects sometimes, and we give a lot of our affection to these. You know, and even problems that we have when a Christian is so laid low and so forth. We trust in other things by which to cope with this rather than trusting in the one good God, our God, who has delivered us from sin and all of its influence, including suffering. We will suffer. Just as Christ suffered, we will suffer. But this is his will for your life. This is part of his good and perfect gift, which comes from the Father of lights. So when we are so pressed low and we find ourselves walking in the valley of the shadow of death and so on, we must fear no evil, for he is with us. His rod and his staff, they comfort us. Okay, so the before is all-encompassing. Ultimately, you shall have no other gods. He is God, and he is God alone. There is no other. Therefore, again, not only does he take preeminence, he takes the sole occupation of God. Now, again, it's easy to somewhat worship things or people and not really notice that we're worshiping these rather than God, or even sometimes, sadly, more than God. Now, in that commandment, you shall have no other gods before me. Again, we've already established the fact that we must not have any other gods. However, this raises the question, does this mean there are other gods? In Old Testament Israel, they were always practicing what we define, or we call syncretism. They would have Yahweh as their first and greatest God, but then they would also serve Baal. You know, he was good for rain and production and so forth. They would worship Moloch, but these were under their worship of Yahweh and so on. He's saying no other gods. Okay. However, I do want to briefly talk about this. So in Psalm 96, verses 4 and 5, the Psalm says, "For the Lord is great and greatly to be praised. He is to be feared above all gods. For all the gods of the people are idols, but the Lord made the heavens." In Isaiah, this is where the prophets really make clear that these idols and these gods are nothing. So in Isaiah chapter 41, verses 23 and 24, "Show me the things that are to come hereafter." He's talking to these idols. "Show me the things that are to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods. Yes, do good or do evil, that we may be dismayed and see it together. Indeed, you are nothing, and your work is nothing. He who chooses you is an abomination." Jeremiah goes into the shame to be avoided. God is warning the people against such idolatry for the good of the people, not because he's going to punish them in wrath and so on. He is a God of wrath, and we must remember that. He is a God of love. However, he is also a God of wrath, but his warning doesn't include his wrath. So Jeremiah chapter 7, verses 18 through 20. "The children gather wood, the fathers kindle the fire, and the women knead dough to make cakes for the queen of heaven, and they pour out drink offerings to other gods, that they may provoke me to anger. Do they provoke me to anger, says the Lord? Do they not provoke themselves to the shame of their own faces? Therefore, thus says the Lord God, behold, my anger and my fury will be poured out on this place, on man and on beast, on the trees of the field and on the fruit of the ground, and it will burn and not be quenched." So again, this is provoking. When we sin, and the reason we don't, maybe sometimes the reason we don't is because we're so afraid of his punishment and provoking him to anger. God is saying, do they provoke me to anger? Isn't it they themselves who are provoking themselves to shame? And then he goes into the wrath to come. I have often heard the expression, when I talk about the wrath of God, people get quite upset about this, and I'm approached, and they complain and say, my God is a God of love. And, I answer in a variety of ways. One is, where do you find he is a God of love? It's found, first of all, in the incarnation of Jesus Christ himself, who is also full of wrath and indignation, righteous wrath, righteous anger. And so, we find him to be a God of love. God is love, but it doesn't say love is God. He is not only love. The Bible also clearly depicts him as a God of wrath. And so he's ultimately saying, this is for your good. If you're going to choose and continue to disobey, this is provoking you to your own shame, and I will not relent my wrath just because you're ashamed. You're still walking in the darkness. I have given you this light. I have saved you. I have delivered you out of the house of bondage. Yet you continue to desire to live as a slave, where your master is sin, the flesh, and the devil. Now, to honor God, Malachi chapter 1 verse 6 says, this is God speaking, a son honors his father and a servant his master. If then I am the father, where is my honor? And if I am a master, where is my reverence? Says the Lord of hosts. So again, one of his commandments is to honor our fathers and our mothers. I believe that is also part of the theocentric side of the law, and we will get into that when we get to the fifth commandment. However, it certainly seems to me that we do give our service and our love and our affections and so on to other people far more than we do to God. I can't wait to see my wife, Sarah, in the morning. I can't wait to see her all the day long. But if I don't wake up with the first thought in my mind over to God and speaking to him and conversing with him, I don't love him more than her. If I go down to rest, if I go to sleep, I love to be beside my dear wife before I slumber. But if my thoughts are not to him, and again conversing with him, I love her more than I love him. So again, all things are his. All of our hearts, all of our minds, all of our souls. The impotency of other gods. This is where we go into the New Testament. So Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 8, verses 4 through 6, "Therefore, concerning the eating of things offered to idols, we know that an idol is nothing in the world, and that there is no other God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as there are many gods and many lords, yet for us there is one God, the Father of whom are all things, from whom, and we for him, and one Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we are all things, and through whom we live." So remember also in Lystra, when Paul heals a man and they begin to worship Paul and Barnabas. So Paul also goes on to say in Romans chapter 1, verses 24 and 25, "Therefore God also gave them up to uncleanness in the lust of their hearts to dishonor their bodies among themselves, who exchanged the truth of God for the lie and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen." Now, so they begin to worship Paul and Barnabas, the creature, rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. You know, this is such a sadly fallen natural disposition for mankind as it is this day. Again, sometimes we don't purposefully, lift these things up more than we should. They happen. That's why we are to be careful. That's where we are to meditate upon his law day and night. And each day reflect where we have fallen short, and so that our morrow might be different. We might be more inclined to follow after him. But we must meditate upon his law day and night all the rest of our lives, because we will never be perfect until we are glorified. And so we make our calling and election sure. Part of that surety is found in meditating upon his law, reflecting where we are in regards to this law, and trying to live our walk to glorify him. Now, so again, people worship things that are somewhat powerful. The stars in the heavens, the trees and all their wonders. Christ even tells us to consider the lilies of the field. This beauty, this wonderful beauty but God has created. Now, so in other words, these gods might change their names. You'll probably find very few still worshiping Baal, or the Astrus, or Zeus, and so on. However, they still worship nature. They still worship the climate, as though we can absolutely control this as much as many proclaim. Still worship the trees. And so we ought to be more careful about, certain forests and so forth. Now, again, we must be good stewards of this creation over which we have dominion. However, these are things. And this is something that Christianity definitely influenced. The movement from animism, so the worship of things, to the worship of God, and recognizing these things are just things. There's no deity within them at all. Even these idols, the prophets always castigated the people. These idols they don't have eyes to see. They don't have mouths to speak. They are deaf and they are dumb. They can do nothing. That's why they are nothing. And their work is nothing. Because they're just things. They're just things that we assign powers and abilities that they are absolutely impotent to do. Now, in conclusion, because most of this is going to, again, fall to next week, God willing. So in Romans chapter 13, verses 8 through 10, Paul says, "Owe no one anything except to love one another. For he who loves another has fulfilled the law. For the commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not bear false witness, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, all are summed up in this saying, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor." So, and then he says, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. Now, so many people will suggest then fulfilling the law is loving your neighbor as yourself. As basic arithmetic, it would tell you, chapter 13 follows after chapter 12. Chapter 12 is where Paul beseeches us to become living sacrifices to God, holy and acceptable. This is our rational service. Some translations say reasonable. This is our reasonable service. And then this is where he says, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. The law, when we meditate upon God's law day and night, our mind is renewed. It's refreshed every single time we meditate upon it. This is why we do this and reflect where we are under this great standard of absolute righteousness. Now, to return briefly to the freedom found in obeying God. Many seek a certain kind of freedom. And the example I'm going to use is homosexuality, or even homosexual marriage and so forth. And without condemning this practice as Paul definitely does. Look, whatever freedom they're looking for is obviously not the freedom as we're defining it. Because this is where they begin to worship the creature rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. If they're looking for freedom outside of the freedom found in God, ultimately that's no freedom. They can speak of it as a freedom. They can speak of it as some sort of liberty, but it is not true freedom. It is not true liberty. In fact, it is continued bondage. They want, again, just like the Israelites who were delivered out of Egypt, they always wanted to return to Egypt. They're always complaining along the way because they encounter strife, thirst, hunger, all these things along the narrow path. And so they wanted to return to bondage. They wanted to return to Egypt, thinking that there was so much there for them. So it is with men and women who come into the church. Remember the parable of the sower. Some fall by the wayside. They don't receive the word at all. Some among stones. Their heart is too hard. But some come in and enjoy his word for a time. Enjoy the name of Christ for a time. Some longer than others, until they're choked out. Ultimately, they were never freed. They were never truly his. Just as John, the disciple, the apostle says, they went out from us because they were never of us. They were never truly of us. Many come and enjoy the goodness as they see found in Jesus Christ. But once it seems like their freedom is lost, they can't have their own autonomy. They see this liberty in these acts and these practices and so forth. They're choked out and they begin to hate his name. I've seen it too often. I've seen it. Would be to God, he moves in their lives and brings them back ultimately actually to him. But the freedom that these practices and these different ideals are suggesting is not the freedom we're defining. It's not the freedom we're considering. It's not the freedom found in Jesus Christ. Absolute liberty into absolute goodness, going from the bondage of sin into liberty in obedience, in willful, loving obedience into the good will, into the good preceptive will of our good and great and holy God. Now, as most of us should be familiar, in Joshua chapter 24, verses 15, he's telling the people, Now, therefore, fear the Lord, serve him in sincerity and in truth, and put away the gods which your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Egypt. Serve the Lord. And if it seems evil to you to serve the Lord, choose for yourselves this day whom you will serve, whether the gods which your fathers served that were on the other side of the river, or the gods of the Amorites, in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. There's another verse which we will consider next week, God willing, which ultimately says, if everyone goes to practice evil, you alone do not follow them. Sometimes actual obedience in this liberty, we are left in isolation. However, we are never in isolation. He will never leave us, and he will never forsake us. Lastly, and somewhat quickly, I do want to consider Psalm 19. Psalm 19, verses 7 through 11. I just want to read it and pray that this is received into your mind, into your heart, and into your soul, to remember that this is from our great liberator, the great and only God who is, and who alone is worthy of all of our adoration, all of our trust, all of our invocation, all of our thanksgiving. The law of the Lord is perfect, converting the soul. The testimony of the Lord is sure, making wise the simple. The statutes of the Lord are right, rejoicing the heart. The commandment of the Lord is pure, enlightening the eyes. The fear of the Lord is clean, enduring forever. The judgments of the Lord are true and righteous altogether. More to be desired are they than gold, yea, than much fine gold, sweeter also than honey and the honeycomb. Moreover, by them your servant is warned, and in keeping them there is great reward. Let us always remember, even after he gave this Decalogue, he tells the people, he gives a litany of different curses. This is again his wrath, his righteous indignation towards sin. He will not have sin. He is an altogether good God. So, one is a litany of curses, many curses, which grow in intensity. The other is full of blessings, which also grow in intensity. Will we have punishment, or will we have a reward? Our reward is him. Remember, he told that to Abram. I am your exceedingly great reward. Let us treasure him than we can possibly, more than anything. Let us treasure him as the great treasure he is. You know, another warning of this commandment is also worshiping God as something or someone he is not. If we remember the golden calf episode, they weren't forming another idol and saying, this God delivered us. They were essentially saying, this golden calf is Yahweh. This is the one. They were worshiping this thing as God. May it never be so with a Christian. May it never be so with us. May God alone receive all of our adoration, all of our trust. May we call upon him all the day long. And may we also, in all of our walk, give him all the thanks and honor that is due his great and holy name, that at last his name might be hallowed in all the earth. Praise be to him and him alone.